Okay, hi. How you doing? Hello, YouTube. Another video here from Graybeard Astrology. I actually made a whole video and I wasn't happy with it, so I've spent the last 2 days redoing the idea. I made a different script. So the first half, I'm going to just cover some differences between traditional astrology and modern astrology. And then I'm going to go into the planets, just a quick overview of the planets and stuff on the second half of this. And all right, let's jump into it here. I'm just going to bring up this slide here and just as a background to talk over. So we'll start out with some of the differences with modern astrology, the astrology kind of the last 150 years or so. And then the traditional stuff precedes all that. So 2,000 years ago up until 150 years ago. So, I mean, very broad time span and stuff. But so modern astrology seems to focus on from the inside of a person, more of a mapping of the psychological basis. Focusing on harmonizing parts and aspects of the person. Now, this would be natal astrology, I suppose. As we discussed and everything, that, the turn of the century, 1900s, astrologers were concerned about being jailed for fortune telling and stuff. So that was the big shift with how they promoted themselves and how they worked with clients. So anyway, traditional astrology kind of focused on more of the external circumstances and the outer environment. And it seeks to integrate the person into their external environment, kind of like, the bigger outside world is bigger than one individual. So we have to try to integrate into the environment as opposed to seeing everything as from the inside out. And people will split hairs and stuff like that, and I'm not trying to criticize anything. I'm just trying to say it's two different points of view. So what we're trying to do nowadays, because everybody nowadays is a modern astrologer, we're living in modern times, and the work that's been done in the last 150 years is been interesting. But there's traditional rules and traditional techniques that are, I think, ignored in just looking at it from a modern point of view. So we're trying to mix these two fields of study, in what we do, because different astrologers have different toolboxes, So anyway, so with these two ideas, let's take, for example, a planet in the seventh house. From a modern point of view, they would look at it as is it a projection from the first house, or how to understand the planet from the inside out of the first house person. Now, in traditional astrology, we would look at a planet in the seventh house possibly representing another person, a different person. So that's kind of the ideas of the two schools of thought there. So modern astrology tends to focus more open-ended, more free will, transcending the chart. There's a little bit of, everything's kind of happy-go-lucky, all kind of equal fortune. But traditional astrology is focused on trying to understand how you fit into the external environment and how you can make it work and it tends to be a little bit more fate-based, or at least that's the discussion in it, is fate or free will. Traditional astrology's text and teachings can sound fatalistic, and they seem to make people uncomfortable. But it's my understanding that it's a teaching tool, and some of the explanations are extreme and exaggerated because they're trying to, like, it's kind of overkill, but they overdo the explanations in an extreme manner to get the point, as opposed to more modern books that have more of a cookbooky kind of description of every breakdown. They take the signs, the houses, and the planets, and then just kind of there's too much gray area and mix matching, for example, talking about Aquarius, the 7th house, or I'm sorry, Aquarius and the 11th house, and, taking the definitions of the houses and matching them with the signs, therefore, so traditional astrology doesn't tend to do that. I think that some charts, are rougher, and sometimes, from a modern point of view, they try to put a happy face on it a little too much. And I think from a traditional point of view, a troubling chart is a troubling chart, and sometimes fated relationships and rough lives are rough, and some things are out of people's control. And there's things we can do, and there's things we can't do. So, understanding that things within your power is what you should focus on, and not worry about things you can't control. And modern astrology doesn't seem to like that sometimes. It makes them uncomfortable. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, splitting hairs, but modern astrology doesn't seem to look at the planets as good or difficult in the way that traditional astrology uses sect, S-E-C-T. I'll be talking about that much more, because there's an inherent, kind of red flag in any particular chart using that. Traditional astrology examines the planets more in depth. They have the dignity rules, dignity rulerships, and exaltation rulerships, and different rulerships, and they're examining the quality of the planet itself. And then the major aspects, what's called the traditional Ptolemaic aspects, we use, and then we use a thing called aversion, which is out of sight of the traditional aspects. It might sound a little difficult to follow there, and all that stuff we'll talk about later. Traditional astrology doesn't give any rulership to the modern planets being Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. Traditional astrology doesn't they don't rule any houses. It's the traditional rulerships. Mars rules Scorpio, not Pluto. So then we'll get into what I started talking about, was called the 12-letter alphabet, the 12 houses and the 12 signs, kind of, mix matching, and that's kind of a big no-no in my opinion. The first house, Aries and Mars, there shouldn't, my understanding is that's the first house and Aries don't have a connection there. So when you're talking about the 7th house, you're not talking about the sign of Libra. The signs and the houses are two different things. This seems to have been taught for about the last 100 years or so, but there's no documents or no lineage past that. And I think it was a teaching tool, And I don't think it's the end of the world, because for years other astrologers went with that school of thought, and and they've had practices and stuff like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But traditionally, it's not accurate, But when you're starting out, I don't think it's the end of the world if you did, fall into that hole a little bit, because there is so much to take in and to understand. But yeah, that's a kind of one of my little pet peeves, is that 12-letter alphabet thing. So we're going to jump over to the next slide here, where we got a list, kind of shows left to right the location of the planets out in space in the order, So we have the inside planets, which is considered Mars, the Earth. It's not a planet, that's our vantage point. So Mars, Venus, Mercury, the Sun, and the Moon, the inside planets. And then the outside planets, considered Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And then we'll just start out going in order here. So, we got this first one. So traditionally, we've got, I'm kind of grouping the planets here a little bit. Just traditionally, Jupiter, Venus, and the Moon are considered benefic planets. They bring good fortune, and they don't usually bring extremes generically. And that is what the malefics do. They're not so friendly planets, Saturn and Mars. Not only do they're kind of represented by cold and heat, and it's the extremes is what their maleficness is. And then the Sun and Mercury generically are considered kind of neutral. And then now looking at modern planets, which I keep professing all this traditional stuff, but yes, I do use the modern planets. So they're considered generational planets because they move so slow, and their effects are they can be, very impactful, but sometimes more subtle, and it depends how you're using them and what they're doing and what's called the transit as they're moving about. They're more significant transits, more impactful, in a transit. Of course, the natal position always means something, but the transit is where, when they're making that hard aspects. And we'll get into what that is later. So, what I've got here is these are different. The circle, the crescent, and the cross. You will see these in all the glyphs of the planets, and that's a whole rabbit hole to go down to. Is all this crazy meaning in these glyphs is amazing. It looks like a couple squiggly lines and stuff, and then you get into it and you hear about all the meaning behind all these all the glyphs. Is so interesting, and I don't even have a lot on that particular part, but I thought this was neat, where the circle represents the spirit. It has no beginning and no ending, considered the spark of life. The semicircle represents the soul, in which is that non-material part of a person that is the sum of all experiences gained during life in a physical body. And then the cross represents the physical form, the three-dimensional world, the physical body, and the outer life living on Earth. So it's kind of like mind, soul, and material. I don't know. I thought it was really interesting. So the first one is the sun here. And what's neat is this, the circle represents life, and then the dot is the spark, with the person, the world with the person in the circle. The circle represents the spirit, which is perfect, complete, and eternal. The dot in the middle is the inspiration and the spark of life, the foundation, the source, the seed, or the germination. A lot of ancient texts talk about the sun representing the mind. When you say, "Oh, I see," when you understand something, "Oh, I see." Well, you see the sun. So that's where that "I see" comes from, or the mind connection comes from. It's the organizing principle of life, the self, the individual essence of one's will and willpower. What allows you to shine, or what lights you up, that where the sun would be an explanation of. Now, the normal astrology chart is 360 degrees, and of course, we all know there's 365 days in a year. So over the course of a year, there's 5 days of change, but for the most part, the sun moves 1 degree per day. And of course, there's some decimal point after that because there's a little bit extra there, but we're not going to split a hair. So we get to the other, the sun is also called a luminary because it illuminates. And then the moon is also a luminary too, but the sun projects the light and the moon projects it. It takes it in and it projects it. Reflects, that's the word, reflects the light. So the moon's function is the intelligence of instinct, the instinct, survival instinct. The moon is the container nurturing matrix, the survival response, the feeling, it's also the feeling of belonging or not belonging. It's a representation of the early home and the family. Of course, it's important when it comes to intimacy with and commitment with another person or a mate. It's more of the instinctual. The older texts talk about the sun being the mind, but they also talk about the moon being the mind, but it's more of an instinctual mind as opposed to intelligent mind or thought. It's the moon is the subconscious mind. It's a representation of comfort and security or lack thereof, If the moon is afflicted, that's a troubling, that could be a troubling thing. Afflicted meaning hard aspects or conjunctions to one of the malefic planets, or if it's in a troublesome sign. Yeah, so the moon moves about 13 degrees a day. So basically you got the moon in every particular sign about 2.5 days. So now we get to Mercury, which would be considered the first planet, the first two being luminaries, but we call them all planets, just to make it a little simple. So the first, obviously the sun and the moon never go what's called retrograde, where they back up in space from our vantage point on Earth, which is a whole another thing we'll have to cover later. But Mercury is the first planet that we get to in this list that actually goes retrograde. So the way it moves in the chart slows down or speeds up sometimes. But for the most part, it only moves 0 degrees or 2 degrees a day. So now the planets are going to start slowing down as they move in the chart, obviously. The moon moving the fastest. So the function of, and we can look at the glyph here of Mercury. It has all three of those symbols that we talked about earlier, where it has the circle, the crescent, and the cross. The top where it's the crescent is also represented kind of like antennas, modern way of looking at that, and the antennas looking for information, so to speak. And it kind of matches the function of Mercury, which is connection, commerce, and communication, gathering and organizing information. And another way to look at Mercury is the memory of information and the action of changing it into language and the action of writing it down. So it's not necessarily the information, it's the action of doing it that is kind of Mercury representation. It's the mental process, the logic of organizing information. There's a nervousness connected with Mercury and that makes the nervousness is what causes their movement, because of the thinking part, the idea or the desire for it or the action. There's a nervous energy there. Also with Mercury, it's the making of symbols, the making of language or different languages, or even like a totem pole. That's a form of language, or carving in old rocks or something before there was alphabet. There was ways to communicate. The symbol's representation of the Roman god Mercury. There's also the crescent on the top of the glyph is connected with the wings on the helmet of the Roman god Mercury too. A little connection there. That was neat. Mercury's supposed to be the closest planet to the sun. In the 80s, there was a lot of talk about another planet being in between the sun and Mercury called Vulcan. And I remember reading, it was like one article I read, Vulcan being the true ruler of Taurus. And it was, just fun. I just remember, I don't remember any other details, but I remember that one. So I know there's people out there that follow Vulcan. It's kind of neat. So now we get to Venus, the next planet, Venus. Symbolize. So what's neat about this little glyph, if you look at it like a hand mirror, like the cross there is a handle, and then the circle, a mirror, and that's connected with the Roman goddess of Venus. The Greeks associated the planet, they called her Aphrodite, and or Athena, and the true kind of traditional texts will talk about the planets as Aphrodite. We'll say Aphrodite. And I should have went over the names, the true traditional names of the planets. Oh, darn it. I'll get that next time. Because some people use they don't say Jupiter, they say Zeus. They say Kronos instead of Saturn. Anyway, getting off there. Venus is called the lesser benefic, and lesser meaning she moves faster. She's a smaller planet, and Jupiter is considered the greater benefic. And we'll get into why they say greater or lesser. People think it, takes away some of the beneficency, but I don't think so. I think it's more about the speed of their transit, the size of the planet. Venus has actually a very interesting whole. Its retrograde movement is a whole subject in its own right. But about 1 degree a day, 0 to 1 degree a day. Okay, so the function of Venus is likes and dislikes, affection, lust, seduction, attraction, achievement, envy, artistic tendencies, anything artistic, anything for beauty or luxury. It is the binding force. It's the positive binding force between relationships. it's the polarity of Mars. Mars is a little bit more rough. So if you look at it, Venus is like a glue, and it's a glue that binds things together when they're just allowed to be themselves with no force. So it's much more pleasurable just allowing something to be and not forcing it to be. Venus, like the moon, is maternal in nature, feminine in nature. What I would say is receptive in nature. It's a yin planet. It would be part of the night sect. And it's everything artsy, art and beauty and music and all the pleasurable things. Not necessarily like Mercury would represent commerce and money, and Venus would represent what you can do with the money, the pleasures that you can have with the money. So I don't really associate Venus with money. It's the pleasure of the money. And Mercury is commerce and mercantile. All right, now we just go on to Mars, and Mars is kind of the polar opposite of Venus. They're kind of polar teeter-totter. And now we're talking about action and making things with more force. Mars represents aggression, action, anger, courage, assertment. It's associated with cutting and burning, self-reliance, fitness, vigor, muscles, irritation, inflammation, fever, territorialness, defensiveness, the energy to survive. Now the Sun and Mars have something together where they're both yang energy and self-reliant kind of energy. The fight or flight energy is Mars. Now, negatively, that would be insecurity, fear, and panic would be Mars not functioning great. Like athletes, military, police, the force of the police, military and athletes, also iron and steel would fall under that. So like, an iron worker or steel worker or something like that is just incredibly Martian. And once again, Venus is the polar opposite. So you think of the sun and the moon being opposites, but a team, and you think of Venus and Mars as being opposites but a team because they need each other. It's a balancing act. And then Mercury is kind of the glue that is gluing all 5 of those planets together. It's the go-between between all of them. You got to have the Mercury in there. And Mercury kind of gets ignored a lot, but it's the glue that's holding all that together. So then we get to the greater benefic. Oh, yeah. Let's go back. Mars is considered the lesser malefic. So the glyph is supposed to be like the spear and the shield of the Roman god of war. It's one way to look at it. And there's been different glyphs over the years too. Mars moves much, much slower. Not even nowhere, like half a degree a day at the most. So you'll have like off years for Mars because Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. So now we're on to Jupiter, which is considered the greater malefic. Greater benefic. Everybody loves Jupiter. Everybody wants the beneficy of Jupiter. I can't blame you. The glyph is kind of like a funny looking 4 in what I always saw it as. There's supposed to be Jupiter holding a lightning bolt, but I can't. I don't see that in the glyph. Jupiter moves relatively slow. It goes retrograde for quite a long time every year. So what's its function? It's a big, huge gas planet, but it was like huge. It's bright. It's so big in the sky. So its beneficency is because of its size and the beauty of it. So its function is expansion and integration. The growth, physical and conscious expansion and growth, travel and freedom are Jupiter things. Confidence, belief, and faith, organized religion, to commune, the part of communing with your fellowship, and also your particular, whatever your particular religion might be, but it's the action of communing is why religion kind of falls in there. The law, Jupiter rules the law as far as because it binds society together. Jupiter's curiosity and integrating new growth and expansion, wisdom. Jupiter is considered the planet of wisdom for sure. Education, optimism, but now there's some not so great. Jupiter can also show excess. Never having enough and always chasing the next thing. Nothing's enough. You're never satisfied. Comes with that desire to keep growing, to keep going, to keep, wanting the next thing. Materialistically, and too much bad food, too much booze, too much drink, too much drug. There's a overindulgence. Overindulging is the negative side of Jupiter. As much as all these great things, but there's too much of a good thing can be too much. Jupiter's growth where Saturn is limits. So now, we talked about these polar planets, Venus and Mars. So now Jupiter's polar opposite is Saturn. So I'll get into Saturn, which is called the big bad guy, the greater malefic. Saturn moves relatively even slower than Jupiter. And he goes retrograde for quite a long time, every year. Saturn takes 2.5 years to go through a sign. Now, I forgot to mention that Jupiter goes through a sign in 1 year. Now, the Saturn glyph here is supposed to represent a sickle. And Saturn is also also known as Kronos. It was considered the Reaper. Now, Reaper was considered a good thing a long time ago. We say Reaper now is the Grim Reaper and stuff like that. But what the sickle represents is the harvest. So, did you have a good year or bad year growing your crops, and now you can harvest them? So it wasn't a negative thing in the sense that unless you had a bad year, what was the karma? How did it go? And when I say karma, it doesn't necessarily have to mean bad news. It's just karma means like the energy, whatever energy was going on, the inertia of things. The story keeps playing out, because the inertia went that way, for good or bad, or middle ground. It's just karma means inertia. How is things going? And it's just going to continue as it goes. So Saturn is kind of like a guiding father figure sometimes, or a learning, the energy of learning a discipline, achieving a long-term goal. So kind of, more, it's the work of doing it, the discipline of doing it, the following your duties and your responsibilities, and maybe a limiting constraint. social norms and social kind of like society norms and stuff like that are all kind of Saturnian things. You can't do this, you can do that. It's a limit. The limits put on any particular society are Saturnian things. Status and physical reality are Saturnian things. But the thing is that once those things become rigid and they immediately start to decay, a brand new piece of concrete is already starting to decay. And Saturn also represents that rigid decay. It's like they say Saturn is reality, but the decay and the change is always happening. It's just very slow. And that's what Saturn does, is it doesn't deny. Saturn doesn't deny, it only delays. So along with those delays and the denials and the and the structure and the discipline and the hurry up and wait, that would be the best way to say it. Hurry up and wait. But with that comes anxiety and fear and depression, and that's the kind of not so fun part. Lord of Karma. Yeah, so, Saturn is it can be your friend when you're being responsible and disciplined. So now we get what we've talked about so far is what's called the planets that you could see with the naked eye, and that's what the ancients used. And in modern times, we discovered in the last 150 years-ish. So when we take all the structure that we just discussed with Saturn, the limitations and stuff, and we want to break through those limitations, that's where Uranus comes in. And it's considered a modern planet. So the information we have is more from more modern times. But so Uranus, a more accurate name would be Prometheus. Uranus should be called Prometheus of the actions and the definitions that we've associated with the planet. Prometheus brought fire to the humans, and in modern times we would call that technology and the sciences. The function of Uranus is the drive for individuality. Uranus can be extreme and disruptive, reactive, and it tends to separate and kind of blow things up like a whirlwind or like a hurricane, so to speak. It breaks boundaries drastically. Technology, computers, airplane technology and stuff is all kind of under the purview of Uranus. Flashes of intuitive genius, any kind of rebellious actions, or like civil unrest out of nowhere. Sometimes Uranian energy will be rebellious just for the sake of fighting anything Saturnian, anything of order. Just wants to be rebelled upon without necessarily even having a good reason. Uranus disrupts what is outdated structure of Saturn. So you look at that as breaking through to the other side of the limitations of Saturn, because, like I said, whatever is Saturnian, it's immediately starting to decay, and Uranus represents what's punching through to the next level. Before we didn't know computers existed until they got, so Saturn there was a limit there, and then we broke through it. Next one is Neptune. So then when you get past the Uranian flash, now we're going on to Neptune. And Neptune's kind of like, man, it is a hard planet to try and just have some bullet points here, because it's such a a squirrely thing. And not being able to explain Neptune explains Neptune, because it's something you could kind of touch. It's a dissolving, emergent, dreamy, kind of mysterious planet. It's artistic, it's delusional, it's deceptive. It's looking through the veil, looking past the veil of the material world. It's ego denying, for like willingness to self-sacrifice yourself, for good or for bad. Hard to tell, projecting onto other people, projecting things onto yourself, deceiving other people, dishonest actions, detachment, going overboard with drinking or drugs. Now, it doesn't mean that that's always going to happen. I'm just saying these things a way to try and describe what it represents. So don't necessarily run away with any of these descriptive words. But, there's a positive end is the artistic end of Neptune. Venus being the planet of creating beauty. Neptune is the inspiration to do it. So creative writing, all the arts and stuff. And then the arts and spiritualism and stuff like that are kind of Neptune's preview. Neptune's a difficult one. Next, we get to Pluto. You'll see two glyphs of Pluto. The one on the right here looks like a P with another line to it, is actually from the guy that discovered Pluto. And I actually had a Percival. I looked up his name and just to try and pronounce it. Percival Lowell is the guy that discovered it. So that's why you sometimes see the glyph of the funny looking P for Pluto, PL I should say. But then on the left there's another glyph that's got the crescent, the sun, and the cross in it too. Pluto is associated with the underworld Roman god, also called Hades. Pluto is power. That's what I think. That's what's funny is that P is in the name is, I always look at it as power. Any kind of power, whether it's like materialistic power or control over people, obsession, compulsion, anything extreme. You'll see Pluto with a lot of politicians, just power hungry people. You'll see that's a Plutonian kind of thing. Anything to the extreme. But what also is a Plutonian thing, that you have like Plutonian experiences where, just to use an analogy, so you desire to, a person desires to have a master's degree. So they start in high school with the inspiration, the Jupiter, to expand their knowledge into a degree. And then they use the Saturn to have the discipline to go through high school and to go through all the college to get the master's degree. And it must be a Saturn word there, the master of a degree. But the whole experience of going from high school to college to getting a master's degree is a Plutonian experience, because you transformed over that whole experience. And it took forever to do it. It took a long, long time to do it. That would be another kind of way to explain a Plutonian thing. And it also explains how all the planets are functioning, doing their function in my explanation there. I hope that's clear. Now, of course, any one of these planets we could talk about for hours. Yeah, real interesting stuff. So now the next slide. Yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. Let's close this out. shut this down. I got through all the planets there. Hopefully I didn't clumsy over too much of it if you're actually still watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by, Graybeard Astrology. Have a good one. Bye-bye.